Deputy McGrath, on behalf of Fianna Fáil.
Thank you very much, Ciaran Corla. Tánaiste, now that the latest Exchequer returns and the Q2 economic data have been published, we are entering a period of intense political negotiations around the budget, which will be announced in 12 days' time. Fianna Fáil fully accepts the imperative to continue to reduce the budget deficit until we get to the point where the Minister of Finance of the day is able to stand up in this House and announce a balanced budget. People welcome any evidence, Tánaiste, that there is an improvement in the economy, but I think you will be the first to admit yourself that they're not seeing any evidence of that yet in their daily lives. They're not seeing it in their pocket, and the truth is that they won't for some time to come, because any recovery in the economy will be gradual and budgets will be tight for a number of years yet in this country. In this budget, we believe it is possible to achieve our deficit target while also protecting vital areas such as education, mental health and disability services. This will not be easy, but it can be done. It is about minimising the inevitable damage inflicted on an economy when you take more money out of it, while at the same time protecting the essential public services that people rely on. Above all else, Tánaiste, this budget must be fair. And unlike the last two budgets, its impact must be progressive in nature. As you know, the ESRI independently verified that the last two budgets disproportionately affected those on low and middle incomes. Those people cannot afford a repeat of that in 12 days' time. The Minister for Finance has now confirmed that the budget adjustment will be somewhat less than the anticipated €3.1 billion. I welcome this, Tánaiste, and now it is about getting the budget right in terms of the overall adjustment figure, and perhaps...
Sorry, hold on a second. Would you please, without interruption? Thank you.
Nearly finished. Yeah. The Minister for Finance has now confirmed the adjustment will be somewhat less than €3.1 billion. I welcome this, Tánaiste, and it is now about getting the budget right in terms of the adjustment figure and perhaps even more importantly about the detailed budgetary measures that will be contained therein. In various interviews, Tánaiste, you have stated your view quite strongly on a number of occasions that the adjustment should be no greater than is necessary to achieve the budget target of 5.1% of the deficit. In other words, that no more will be taken out than is absolutely necessary. Is that still your view, Tánaiste?
Thank you. Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, can I acknowledge what Deputy McGrath has said, that first of all, that the economy is recovering, and I do acknowledge that I think many people have yet to experience that in their own lives. We are seeing an increase in employment, 3,000 additional jobs per month. We're seeing a drop in unemployment. The figures, the live register figures this week, showing the level of unemployment at its lowest level since 2009, now down to 13.3% from a high of 15.1%. We're also seeing improvements in areas like construction, for example. Over the course of the last year, 11% increase in construction activity. Probably more significantly, I think, the fact that we're seeing an increase in the number of planning applications, up about 37% last year, all of which is indicating that we're seeing improvement. In relation to the budget, the Exchequer returns show that Ireland is now on track to meet our targets in 2013, with tax receipts on profile and expenditure under control in the year to the end of September. And I think that this highlights again the consistent improvement in the management of Ireland's public finances by this government. The Exchequer deficit at the end of September 2013 stood at €7.142 billion, which is €4 billion lower than the same period last year. The tax base is growing, with just under €26.9 billion in taxes collected this year, which is up €768 million on the same period last year, an increase of almost 3%. I think more significantly is that income tax receipts are up by €400 million last year, and given that there was no increase last year in income tax, I think that reflects the overall increase in the number of people who are now at work in the economy, and VAT is up by 80 million, I think, reflecting an increase in retail activity. I have said from the beginning of public discussion in relation to the broad budget issues that I believed that it was possible for us to meet our target this year by doing an adjustment in the budget of less than 3.1 billion, which was the figure which was being advocated to us by many commentators. The Minister for Finance confirmed that yesterday, that it should be possible to meet our targets this year by doing an adjustment of less than 3.1 billion.
Thank you.
You're right that the budget discussions are at an intensive stage at this stage. They obviously won't be completed until right close to the budget, and at that stage we'll have a final figure for the adjustment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ceann Comhairle. Well, Tánaiste, if you parse the words that you have said there, that is a change in your position, because you haven't just been saying all along that the adjustment can be less than €3.1 billion, but you have been saying all along repeatedly and in very clear terms that the adjustment should be no more than is absolutely necessary to achieve the deficit target that we are required to achieve. That's what you have been saying. Now, I still don't know what that figure is. That figure could be 2.5 billion, it could be 2.7 billion, but you haven't just been saying that it should be less than 3.1. So can you advise the House, if that is still your position, that the adjustment should be whatever is required to achieve the deficit target and no more of an adjustment? I think it's important that you confirm that to us. And the fundamental point I want to make in relation to the composition of the budget is that it must pass the basic test of fairness. The last two budgets, in my view, have not passed that test. You will never get a consensus on what is fair, but I think the best measure is whether or not the impact of the budget is progressive and that the burden of its measures is carried by those most able to carry it. And that was not the case in the last two budgets. So is your position still no more of an adjustment than is required to achieve the 5.1%? And will this budget pass that basic test of fairness, which the last two budgets did not?
Thank you, Deputy. Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, I think there's one thing certain about this budget, Deputy McGrath. Whatever is in it, you and your party, and I think the opposition generally, will oppose it. I think that's pretty certain. So, let's start with that. We're now, I think, entering the political. Yeah, of course, yeah, and that's politics. And we're now entering. I think what we're now entering is the political discourse on the budget, and that's fair enough. And you're not going to.
No need for the chorus. Thanks.
You're not going to tempt me to tell you what the budget figures are in advance of the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform making their statements to the House. The position has not changed. No, the position has not changed. What we have to do here is we're on track to exit the bailout programme this year. We know we have a deficit reduction target to meet. We have to meet that target. We know that we are seeing recovery taking place in our economy, and we can all look at the figures that support that. We have to make sure that recovery is not put at risk, that we continue to meet our targets, that we do a budget that meets that, that ensures that it continues to support employment, that it's directed at getting people back to work, that it is fair. I reject entirely your assertion that the last two budgets were not fair. There were measures.
We're over time, thank you.
No, I mean, it's a bit rich.
We're over time, so please let the Tánaiste finish.
It's a bit rich coming from Fianna Fáil. When you signed up to an agreement at the end of 2010, which prescribed what would be in the budgets for the subsequent 3 years, and we had to. It is true.
Sorry, Tánaiste,
you go back and revisit. Go back and revisit. I mean, the utter hypocrisy now. The utter hypocrisy.
Sorry, hold on. Deputy
The utter
Duty, please
hypocrisy of
try and
the
restrain
Reform.
yourself.
You signed up to an agreement in 2010 which prescribed what would be in the budget. We had to change that, and now that we have succeeded in getting us to a point where we're exiting from the bailout, where we're seeing the economy recovering, it's as if you want to wipe history clean and pretend that you never had hand, act or part in the mess that we inherited in the first place.
Deputy MacDonald. Deputy MacDonald, please. Thank you.
Tánaiste, this morning we heard first-hand stories of families struggling to pay their gas and electricity bills. According to the St Vincent de Paul, the average cost of energy bills has increased €500 per year. And working families, and indeed those out of work, are simply unable to meet the spiralling costs of gas and electricity. And when you hear their stories, they really are heartbreaking. I know in my own constituency, I've met young mothers who have gone without gas or electricity. I've spoken to fathers hit by wage cuts, tax hikes, who have seen their arrears spiral out of control. And these families, many of them, were forced to make a choice between feeding their children or paying their energy bills. And the arrears mounted up and the sleepless nights increased. And what has been the response of your government to this? Well, a Labour minister cut the smokeless fuel supplement, increasing costs for people living in the cities. A Labour minister cut the fuel allowance by 6 weeks, wrenching €120 out of the pockets of families struggling to pay their fuel bills. A Labour minister sat back and did nothing as the regulator hiked up gas and electricity costs, so the arrears mount up and the sleepless nights increase. So Tánaiste, given your commitment to fairness as expressed this morning, can you tell these struggling families how you will help them to meet their gas and electricity bills in Budget 2014?
Well, first of all, can I say that I agree that energy costs, price of fuel, have been increasing. As a country, I suppose in a way we're at the receiving end of the internationally set prices of fuel. In a way, we're at the end of a very long pipeline that comes from Russia. Now, I have looked at the St Vincent de Paul report, and I want to welcome it. And in particular, I want to look at where the St Vincent de Paul focuses attention on what can be done to ease the burden on hard-pressed families in relation to their fuel bills. In the statement issued by the Vincent de Paul, they say there are homes out there that with some basic investment could become warmer, healthier and cheaper to run. And I agree with that. They acknowledge that 250,000 homes have acquired retrofitting, measures such as attic and cavity wall insulation, draft-proofing, low-energy lighting. But they do point out that more needs to be done in the retrofitting area. And I agree with that. And that is why the government has concentrated its focus in finding a long-term solution to the high cost of energy that people have to bear. The sustainable, there are, the government, as I've said, have prioritised scarce resources in the retrofitting of homes through the Warmer Homes Scheme and through local authorities. The Warmer Homes Scheme recently retrofitted its 100,000 house, and this year the government's stimulus package included €50 million specifically for retrofitting local authority homes. This year also the government committed €18 million to the Warmer Homes Scheme, which will support the delivery of energy efficiency measures to approximately 10,000 homes, resulting in energy savings worth about €1.8 million. This is part of the government's overall affordable energy strategy, which we launched in 2011, shortly after the government was formed, because we identified back then that the issue of energy efficiency, the issue of energy costs, was something that had to be dealt with on a sustainable basis in the period ahead. We have recently, and you mentioned specifically, low-income households, and I think it's fair to say that every household in the country is affected by high energy costs and the price of fuel. But last year we decided to focus the affordable energy strategy on households that were identified as being in poverty, particularly households who spend over 20% of their disposable income on energy. And I can go through, Councillor, I've a list of the various changes that we have made in that. I appreciate them over time, but I'm quite happy to go into that in much greater detail for the Deputy in the second part of my reply.
Deputy MacDonald.
Thank you. When you look at the figures and the achievement that you articulate here this morning in terms of retrofitting, I mean, I'd be kind and call it modest, but it is certainly very underwhelming the scale to which this has been rolled out. You need to remember, Tánaiste, that yourself, your own party, the Labour Party, promised a 40 million allocation specifically for fuel poverty, specifically aimed at those suffering fuel poverty. And I accept that high energy costs affect everybody, every household. But there is an identifiable group of people who are suffering, who cannot meet their energy bills. They have their energy supply cut off, even when they've resorted to metering. And you mentioned the St. Vincent de Paul. Between 2008 and 2011, just to give a sense of the scale, St. Vincent de Paul fuel assistance to families increased from 3.8 million to 10.4. And that's the trend of what the St. Vincent de Paul is dealing with. So I want to know from you, Tánaiste, specifically what you will do in this budget in respect of people experiencing fuel poverty, those families who cannot pay their bills. What will you do about the fuel allowance? What will you do about the smokeless fuel support? Because people hear the bigger picture rhetoric that you deliver, that we're on the receiving end of global forces. That's no comfort to people whose homes are cold. So what have you in mind? What will you line up? And will you give comfort to people that you will, in fact, particularly in respect of the fuel allowance, that you won't be so mean-spirited as you were in your last budget?
Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, the Deputy says we undertook to commit €40 million to addressing the issue of fuel poverty and addressing the problem of fuel prices. Last year we have committed more than that, 50 million, to the retrofitting of local authority homes. No, bear with me now. Please let me answer the question.
Please, let's listen to the reply.
As I said, we've committed 50 million to local authority homes alone. There's 18 million for the improvement of the warmer homes scheme. What we need to see happening, because this is not a short-term problem. I mean, the issue of high fuel prices, the issue of the cost of fuel, is not something that can be dealt with or should be dealt with on a short-term basis. We all know from experience that the price of fuel goes up and it goes down again. Unfortunately, in recent years, it has been going up, and it has been going up largely because oil and gas are scarce resources. They're in places that are hard to get. It takes a long way for them to come here, and we are subject to international pricing. And in order to address that long term, the best way of doing it is to do the retrofitting programme that we have set out to do, and to concentrate that, in particular, in the first instance, to concentrate that on families where there are lower incomes. That's what gets down the cost of heating homes.
Please.
That's what gets down.
Please.
That's what gets down the cost of heating a home and the cost of fuel prices. Now, we're committed to doing that, and indeed only last week I had quite a lengthy discussion with Minister Rabbitte about the plans that he has to encourage more people to take up the retrofitting scheme and the grants and the various forms of assistance that are available through his department and through Sustainable Energy Ireland. We want to see, and we are going to drive this, to see that more homes are retrofitted, that more homes are, have greater degree of energy efficiency, which has the benefit of bringing down the cost of heating a home and the cost of energy for households in this country.
Thank you.
That is the route. And by the way, that is what the St. Vincent de Paul say is the best way of dealing with this problem. It's in their report. That's what they've said. I welcome the report that they have presented. I think it is very timely, and I believe that what they are saying about getting more people into the retrofitted scheme, that is the way for us to go.
Thank you. Deputy Donnelly.
Thank you, Ken Corlett. Tánaiste, on Tuesday, the financial services firm Grant Thornton issued a report where they analysed the last 5 austerity budgets and looked at the impact that those budgets have had on Irish families. Amongst the findings, Tánaiste, are that Irish families are now paying on average double the amount of tax that they did in 2008, and that when government cuts are taken into account, like for example child benefit, that Irish families are down €6,000 on average in disposable income. Then that's before a full year of property tax, which is coming in next year, and it's before price inflation. So, for example, the rise we've just been listening to on energy costs for the year of €500. So, not only do Irish families have a lot less money because of the increased prices, that money isn't going as far. And Tánaiste, what's particularly damning from the report is what it says about the distributional effects. Who's been asked to carry the heaviest burden? Now, what Grant Thornton found was that a family with an income of €80,000 has seen their tax burden rise by about 50%. But it also finds that a family with an income of half that, of €40,000, has seen their tax burden rise not by 50%, but by 125%. This, they say, was due largely to the changes to the universal social charge, which came in 2011. And Tánaiste, a tax partner at Grant Thornton, said the following: "It's clear low to middle income earners have paid a heavier price in terms of the percentage increases in taxes that they pay." Tánaiste, we have independent expert opinion that the first 2 budgets from Fine Gael Labour have unfortunately increased inequality in this country.
Question, please.
Now, this was not inevitable, it was a choice, and as I think you would agree, is bad for everybody. It hammers those who have the least, and it slows the full economic recovery of the country. So, Tánaiste, with the government's 3rd austerity budget just 12 days away, I would ask you the following 2 questions. Will you, as Tánaiste, commit to the members of Dáil Éireann that when the budget comes in, or at the very least before we are asked to vote on it, that you will give us an impact assessment of the proposals in terms of socio-economic indicators, who will be asked to carry the heaviest burden? And Tánaiste, if that analysis shows that the proposal being put to Dáil Éireann asks those who have the least to bear the heaviest burden, will you withdraw the Labour Party's support for that budget? Thank you, Ken Corlett.
Thank you.
I think most people in this country don't need a report from Grant Thornton or anybody else to tell them that we've had an economic crisis in this country. In 2008, this economy crashed effectively. The people that we inherited the government from put us, first of all, put the taxpayer on the hazard for the entire banking system when they introduced a blanket guarantee of the entire banking system. The consequence of that was that the country was made responsible, and taxpayers were made responsible for the debts of the bank. The property market, the property bubble that had been at the centre of the previous government's economic strategy burst. We ended up in a situation at the end of 2010 where the country's financial situation was so bad that there was nobody out there in the international money markets that would lend money to this country. And I don't think we need a report from Grant Thornton or anybody else to tell us, and families in this country, and households in this country, doesn't need a report from anybody to tell them how difficult that has been for families in this country for the last 5 years. It has been difficult for them. People have lost jobs, people lost businesses, have seen their income shrunk, and in some cases have looked at a situation where they've seen their children having to emigrate. And the job of work that this government took on was that we would rescue the country from that economic disaster and turn it around, and we're succeeding in doing that. The figures that are now available to us show that compared to what we had prior to the election of this government, when 250,000 jobs were lost in the previous 3 years, we're now creating 3,000 jobs per month. We have seen in the course of this week the number of people who are unemployed on the live register at its lowest rate since 2009. We are beginning to see retail activity improving. We are beginning to see recovery in this country. And what we have to do now is we have to stay that course to get the country to recover, to ensure that additional jobs are created, that we drive on with that recovery, that we have our public finances in order so that we don't find ourselves in the kind of situation that we were in at the end of 2010. Now, you know very well, Deputy Donnelly, that I'm not going to talk to you here this morning about a budget that's not going to be announced until the 15th of October. But I can tell you this, that the budget on the 15th of October will be part of this government strategy to continue the job of recovery that we have undertaken. It will contribute to that, and it will be balanced and fair.
Thank you. Deputy Donnelly.
Thank you, Tánaiste. I was told to never expect an answer to any question I put in Leader's questions, so far so good. Tánaiste, you described to Deputy McGrath the budget as being fair. Last year's budget as being fair. We don't need a report. We don't need a report from Grant Thornton to tell us we've had an economic crisis.
I'll make decisions on that. Thanks very much. Please
Thank you,
proceed with your
Ken.
question.
We don't need a report from Grant Thornton to tell us that we've had an economic collapse. But the report from Grant Thornton directly contradicts what you said to Deputy McGrath about last year's budget being fair. It says very clearly that those who had the least, or who have the least, have been asked to contribute the most. Now, Tánaiste, the two questions I asked you were, will you provide to all the members of Dáil Éireann an analysis? When you bring the budget forward, will you provide us all with an analysis so we can think about how we're going to vote, which looks at the distributional effects of the proposed budget? And secondly, if it shows that the distributional effects are such that those who have the least are asked to contribute the most, will you withhold Labour support? Now, Tánaiste,
thank you.
Wrongly, in my opinion, I'm described sometimes as a right-wing neoliberal. But you've got to ask yourself.
We're not into that at the moment, though. We're into the leader's questions.
If the crazy...
Thank you. Thank you. We're over time. Thank you.
Tánaiste, if the crazy right-wing neoliberal is seeking assurances on equality from the leader of the Labour Party and is not getting them, something has gone wrong here. Thank you, Ken Corley.
Tánaiste, maybe you might be able to hear from the Tánaiste now without interruption, please. Thank you.
Well, now, Deputy Donnelly, you read out here figures for increases in tax on families. This government didn't increase income tax in the life of this budget. You read out, no, hold on. Let me answer the question now. You expressed views in relation to people who are most vulnerable in our society. This government has not, I think to the surprise probably of yourself and many, reduced the basic rates of social welfare payments since we came into office. This government has taken over 300,000 of the lowest paid people out of the universal social charge, to which you refer. And in addition to that, this government has also restored the minimum wage and restored the Joint Labour Committee system for the determination of pay and conditions for lower paid people. Of course, you will get. You're here long enough to know that at budget time you get, in addition to the budget statement that is issued by the Minister for Finance and by the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, you will also get a wad of documentation which will show the impact, which shows the impact of budget measures on families at different levels of income. And you know, to be fair to you, Deputy Donnelly, you know, I did think when you came in here that you were a right-wing neoliberal. The longer you're here, the more I'm coming reluctantly to the conclusion that you're just an opportunist.
That completes Leaders' questions for today.